This episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast is brought to you in partnership with Tesco.
There just seemed to be one event after another, from geopolitical issues, Trump's tariffs. All of those things feed into a very much a world market for commodities, and that impacts us domestically. And the productivity and financial performance of land directly impacts its values and therefore the amount that comes to the market.
A big drop in farmland sales. We find out why. We join dozens of farmers who've teamed up to create the UK's biggest ever landscape recovery project worth £100 million. News on the red tractor scheme and a warning for winter bean growers. We speak to the farmer with 8 reservoirs to put all this winter rain to good use. Welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh. Broom.
Straight to our top story then. The amount of UK farmland sold last year dropped by 12%, with some areas falling even more than that. Farmland sales in the east of England fell by 16% in 2025, with average prices easing by more than 4%. A mixed picture nationally, with prices overall down 1%. That's according to land agent Savills. Well, to make sense of it all, we called Alex Lawson, head of rural agency at Savills, and asked him to explain to us exactly what's going on.
I think in reality, it's a combination of a number of reasons. There just seemed to be one event after another for farmers. We've got all sorts of impacts from geopolitical issues, wars in Ukraine and Gaza, Trump's tariffs. All of those things feed into a very much a world market for commodities, and that impacts us domestically. But here on shore, there's been a whole load of issues as well. Changes in policy, other kind of political uncertainty, tax changes, interest rates. The weather is a massive issue for farmers, clearly, and we've had just the most extraordinary last 2 or 3 years, which means that practical farming is difficult. And all of these things feed into market impacts. And so you've got produce commodity prices that are somewhat lower because of over global supply. And the costs of production for farmers, as with almost all businesses right now, have been increasing with some of those impacts of recent government decisions on national insurance contributions, minimum wages, etc. So, I think the point is farmers, like other businesses, as I said, are being squeezed, and they are an unbelievably resilient group of people. But some of them, I think, have just felt enough's enough.
165,000 acres sold last year, 12% down on the year. Prices holding steady, dipped a little bit by about 1%, still around, £9,000 or £10,000 per acre, varying though, according to where you are.
It's quite difficult to be really precise on this. So the east of England, it depends where your definition are. The east of England has reduced to a degree in supply. The East Midlands, which would be a very similar land type, because that goes up into kind of Lincolnshire and to South Yorkshire, actually saw quite an increase. The reality is that eastern side of the country, Cambridgeshire, Lincolnshire, to a degree Kent and Yorkshire, that's the kind of the breadbasket of England. Really, it's where the vast majority of farming is arable, and just because of the specialism and this kind of the geographic influences that make that land so good for arable farming, it makes it slightly less easy for diversification, and some diversification options aren't really there in the east of the country, and therefore the productivity and financial performance of land is directly impacts its values, and therefore the amount that comes to the market. And so it is more impacted when there's a slowdown in commodity prices and an increase in costs. So we're not surprised that there's a slight reduction in value, but in the East Midlands at least, quite a larger level of supply. Prices held up pretty well, and sellers and buyers alike gain confidence from an operating market. So when sellers see that the land is selling, then they're more confident about putting land on the market, and buyers similarly take confidence from positive market dynamics. And so that's why, whilst there was a greater supply in East Midlands, the vast majority of that sold pretty well.
So that's the arable east of the country, as it were. What about the dairy and livestock heartlands in the west of the country?
Well, what's interesting is we've had a kind of consolidation and focus on quality property, perhaps not surprisingly, and that applies to all sectors of the market. So there's a polarization to the best quality land for arable farming in the east. Similarly, in the west of the country and those more traditionally livestock areas, there's a gravitation towards those areas that really do grow good grass. And we've got this extraordinary changing climate where we seem to have floods and droughts, and actually the limitations on grass production means that those areas that really do grow grass well year round and year to year have become much more popular. And as you say, beef's looking much better. Dairy's dipped a bit, but until fairly recently, there was a huge interest from dairy farmers in those really good quality farms where there's sufficient rainfall to produce excellent grass.
And for the rest of 2026, Alex, what's your crystal ball telling you?
Well, right now, there does actually surprisingly seem to be little coming forwards. Whilst we're talking to a few people, the uncertainty over kind of political decisions, interest rates, policy decisions, and what's going to happen with grant schemes, people tending to sit on their hands. So we're predicting that supply is going to be relatively constrained this year. Clearly, we've got the impact of the IHT changes coming in from the end of April onwards, and that no doubt will cause huge headaches for some farmers and landowners. But as I say, overall, we're expecting supply to stay relatively constrained this year, possibly with a bit of an uptick in 2027 as the impact of the inheritance tax changes come into play. So as far as values are concerned, we're expecting supply to remain constrained and competing demands to continue, and therefore we're expecting values to stabilise. And the expectation is that if agricultural transition goes as planned and the policies towards really promoting productivity and profitability in farming come to pass, then we would hope that values will start to improve from 27, 28 onwards.
That's Alex Lawson from Savills on the farmland market. Louise, no one reason for the market doing what it's doing. Some people might think this is all to do with inheritance tax, but in reality, a combination of factors.
Well, there are always exceptions to the rule, aren't there? And I think the land market is no different, really, to that. Gosh, it is, as you say, it's a mixed picture, and farmland prices have eased, I think, over the last 12 months. But the thing that we always have to recognise, and I can't imagine that this will ever change, is that premium or well-located land has held up. And there's always a demand for that sort of land and for strategic land as well, because, of course, the planning rules are changing, aren't they? So I think for other land, though, realistic pricing is really important if you want to sell. There will definitely be some potential sellers waiting for policy clarity. So, and all of the things that have, as you mentioned, affecting farmland, a lot of it comes back to that, doesn't it, at the moment? So, yeah, some will be waiting, some aren't. There's so much variation out there, isn't there? And I think for all the reasons that the audio said, and, we know that.
And Hugh, Alex Lawson saying location as important as ever when it comes to land values. So too are options for diversification.
Look, I think everywhere's got, I would say, eastern counties. I mean, certainly think of East Anglia. There's plenty of diversification opportunity there. Look, regardless where the market is, in terms of if you look at the value, the capital values of the market, it's always going to come down to the same few things, isn't it? If you've got people looking for good farmland, productive, fertile farmland, not necessarily graded by the land, some would say flawed land grading system, then obviously that's going to command a price for those people. People that want options for land, then it changes to different areas. And yes, you can diversify possibly far easier here in sunny Surrey, where there's 1.2 million wealthy consumers that want to spend money on absolute nonsense, and you can house and store or sell some of that compared to someone stuck up the side of a Welsh hill in a not very touristy place where you struggle to get footfall. So there is a huge variation there. It surprises me. The big thing about these numbers from Savills that surprised me, and obviously it's based on land reg data, it just goes to show how much land has not sold in the last 12 months. Because when I drove back from holiday in Cornwall, Devon, it was last year, last summer, up the A303. I have never, in all the history of going up and down that road all the time as I do, seen so many for sale signs along the side with plots of land here, there and everywhere. And indeed, all last year, driving around, everywhere you went, there were plots of land for sale. Now, obviously, that was potentially knee-jerk to people reorging their business, their family setups because of the IHT thing and all the stuff going on. What this shows you is how little of that land is actually sold. Because if they're 16% back, why hasn't it sold? Did they take it off the market or didn't they price it to sell? But it's interesting. But the fundamentals are not going to change, are they? It's about who your buyers are and what they want out of it. And all buyers are looking for different things. Some people want to put ponies on it. Some people want to put bricks on it. Some people want to put tractors on it. And ever the world is thus.
And Louise, Alex suggesting the farmland market will be largely steady as she goes, as it were, for the rest of the year, with things starting to look a little bit rosier in 2027 or perhaps even 2028.
It's difficult to call, isn't it? I mean, there's definitely been more variation in prices paid, and some places have been taking longer to sell than perhaps they might have done beforehand. But I think all the commentators around this market, they do tend to use the word resilient quite a lot when you ask them what's happening. So I think the market is confounding them just as much as it's possibly confounding us. You know, we have seen a bit of a drop off, as I said. Prices have eased a bit, but these really well-located farms, still loads and loads of interest. They are still very attractive and they are achieving good prices.
And your final thoughts on land, Hugh?
Well, I just wonder where this uptick in 27 is coming from, because I can't see any uptick. If we're talking solely about farmland values, there is no uptick on the horizon. I'm sorry to depress you all, on the commodities market. And look, we could all get taken by surprise by a big war or some huge explosion or drought somewhere in the next 72 hours and it could turn it on a sixpence. But at the moment, when you look at the weather patterns, you look what's going on cropping wise across the planet, there are no huge holes appearing in commodity supply. So on the basis of that, arable returns are going to look like absolute nonsense. Some other return, well, dairy's not much good, beef's okay, sheep's okay, but they're hardly drivers of huge land purchase. And then look at the flip side. And you look at the resi market, you look at the planning permission, residential development land market, it is absolutely on its derriere. I mean, you go north of London, any agents listening to this having a great time north of London, they are banging their head against the steering wheel trying to move this stuff on. No one wants to do it. And then you've got these huge new town things coming in, the Tempsfords and things like that, utterly saturating various parts of the marketplace. How the heck that brightness is coming in 27, I don't know. The market's been falling for 3 years now. Even in the really hard, sexy, grade one, well-located Fenland loveliness world, it's been falling for 3 or 4 years, those capital values. So I hate to pour proverbial on the fire, but it doesn't, I think it's going to be steady. And it's going to be moving, and there's always going to be some demand from someone. But those fundamentals which spike it, whether it's hiding your family's millions, wanting to develop the next best new town, or grow the world's best crop of wheat, none of those at the moment are looking like particularly sexy markets.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And now we're joined by Natalie Smith from Tesco, this week's podcast partner and UK agriculture's biggest customer. British farmers have a great reputation, Natalie, and do lots of great work, especially when it comes to the environment. But how do we get that message across to the public?
It's a really good question, and I think something of real concern to our farmers as well. So again, from a recent survey that we ran, nearly 98% of farmers that we asked said that they had real concerns in terms of public perception of farming and the environmental impacts. So I think there's a lot more that we can do together as an industry with joined up messaging sort of across ourselves, government, and the farming supply chain, so that we can talk about some of the positive stuff that's happening within UK agriculture.
I guess it's about being loud and proud then, and about championing the good that farming does.
Absolutely. I think there is so much good stuff that is happening out there. So how can we talk about that positively? Talk about it in a way that it's not a problem that needs fixing. It's more around how we can continue to improve and develop. And as I say, there's loads of positive good work out there, but I think it's also around recognising that there's always more to do, and that's okay.
I guess as a retailer, you're very much used to talking to consumers. You're helping farmers do that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's challenging to talk to consumers, especially agriculture can be complicated, but I think there are a number of different ways that we can do that through various media channels. It always helps for us to be able to talk about individual farmers and, showcase some of the stuff specifically that's happening on farm. But I think there's more that we can also do within our own industry to talk about some of the great stuff that's happening within our supply chain. So over the last couple of years, we've brought farmers together in a number of different ways. So whether that's through roundtable events, we are part of the Oxford Farming Conference for the last couple of years, and also our chief exec is joining the NFU conference. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to be really proud of some of the stuff that we're delivering alongside our farmers within our supply chain.
Natalie Smith from Tesco, working with farmers, this week's podcast partner and UK agriculture's biggest customer. Thank you.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, more than 50 Cotswold farmers have joined forces for the UK's biggest ever landscape recovery project, worth £100 million of DEFRA's money. The North East Cotswold Farmer Cluster's Even Load Landscape Recovery Project, bit of a mouthful, will see more than 3,000 hectares of habitat restored. Good for the environment and some valuable revenue for the farm businesses involved. Earlier, Louise and I caught up with project facilitator Tim Field, and we started by asking Tim just what will the farmers be doing?
Yeah, so chuck them in three buckets. It's grassland restoration and creation of species-rich grassland. It is deciduous woodland, but also parkland and wood pasture. And then there's watery wetland habitats as well. So floodplain grazing marsh through fen, river restoration, ponds, and so on.
More than 50 farmers involved, Tim. Good for the environment, but also good for revenue, for farm income at a time when the basic payment scheme is all but gone and the sustainable farming incentive, well, is still not on stream. These are big numbers. £100 million. It isn't free money, though. It does come with a cost. How good is this going to be for the farm businesses involved?
The biggest sign that this is going to be good for the farm business was when the confidence in SFI fell away and obviously the BPS being phased out. The farm businesses were looking at that big gap in their income. And at the same time, God knows how many rubbish harvests we've had now and wet winters. And I mean, some farms, some fields have been flooded 8 times in 9 years. These aren't conditions for profitable farming without some support. And so, when we're talking about 10 to 15, 20% of a farm going into a 20-year agreement, and it is a long agreement, but that's a 20-year agreement for more certain revenue streams than any other that are available at the moment. And so it's just about the diversification of risk. And the farm businesses that we're talking to are very aware that, this is something that could just give them that stability on bits of ground which aren't the most profitable or from a typical farming system. And so actually, I wouldn't want to say it for every farm, but I do think that there's a certain lifeline out there, or perception of this as being a lifeline for some of those farm businesses that would have otherwise really struggled. It's been tough.
And Tim, when it comes to landscape recovery projects, there are some scary words in there as far as many farmers are concerned, large scale, long term land use change. How easy or difficult has that been to sell to the farmers in your group?
Yeah, those are some words that really spark either a disinterest or an argument. But actually, if you think over the millennia and centuries and decades of farming, we've been shifting land use and shifting how the landscape looks for a long time. And so actually, once you get past the fact that there might be some change, farmers have been very receptive, I'd say, to the conversation. And bearing in mind that we're not talking about whole farm land use change here. This is very much just sort of 10 to 20% of the farm that actually the farms know they want to do something slightly differently. And so it's been a very open dialogue, and that's been key to actually creating the landscape scale once you aggregate all those farms together.
And I believe that this is a blend of private and public money. And obviously, we've seen what DEFRA are committing to this. Given the political turmoil that's around at the moment, how sure can you be that DEFRA won't pull the plug on this? I believe they can, under the terms at the moment, opt out after 12 months.
That's a great question. Turmoil in politics, yes. But actually, DEFRA's had quite a busy time for the last several years, and actually landscape recovery is arguably the one strand of elms that's been more robust and constant in those times. It's survived different parties in government, and I don't know, lost count of how many ministers. So I'm actually quite confident that the policy team at Landscape Recovery in DEFRA and Natural England Environment Agency and Forestry Commission, they're fully behind this, and they're still being listened to by ministers and the seniors. And so I'm confident that what they've started on will be robust and carry on, not least because there is so much benefit across departments. Government's getting a good deal with the private money being crowded in, and in terms of rural resilience, of flooding and so on, water quality outcomes, there's multiple benefits. There's a big component of this around communities, and that's broader stakeholder engagement and public access. And so, dare I say, it just ticks a lot of boxes in the DEFRA family to get this to work. And there'll be an awful lot of support from outside DEFRA as well across government.
And what's your advice to other farmers listening to this, Tim, thinking, I could do with doing something like this, generating some revenue? How should people go about doing something similar?
Well, it started for us as a group of farms that wanted to connect better on their various DEFRA schemes, to connect up habitats, but also enter new markets. And I think that's a really good place for any project to start, is with a group of farms that know the land and have to be invested in this. They've got to own it. In my opinion, it's got to feel like this is something that they are in control of, and they're driven to deliver. And rake around, look for some funding opportunity to do aggregated farm projects, baselining particularly. And then you've got to have those pioneers, those case studies, those ambitious farms that can actually crack on and do a project and show delivery. So we've got a handful of innovative, pioneering sort of farms that have, for one farm that's done a massive woodland scheme and sold the carbon, a sort of premium carbon product because of the other community benefits and the flood resilience and water quality benefits. And so I wouldn't wait for the application window for round 3. As I say, I think it's important to galvanise a group, get some baseline data. Don't ignore opportunities thinking that landscape recovery round 3 is going to come around the corner. I think it's important that we just crack on and get as ready as you can before it does open.
That's Tim Field from the North East Cotswold Farmer Cluster. Louise, an absolutely fascinating project, and these sorts of schemes are going to become more and more important as time goes by.
Yes, I think they are going to become increasingly important. And as Tim said, farmers are doing a lot more than providing food. They are providing value to their communities and to wider society. And these sorts of projects are starting to recognise that and allow farmers to get some return from that, really. And there are a number of these projects, as we know, in the offing. DEFRA has these different stages where you can apply and so on and so forth, and they're all at different stages of that process. But I think anybody who's involved in one of those will be really encouraged by this even load project and what they have managed to get over the line. And now they are literally getting going. In this case, it's 55 farms, 3,000 hectares. But this whole farmers working together, connectivity, not just for nature, but for all these other environmental services that farmers can provide, that they are really, really important. So, yes, they can be scary. They are long-term. They often do involve land use change, and that's something which people have to get their heads around. But of course, in this case and in a few other cases, they do allow farmers to drive income from some very marginal or unproductive land. And I think it's very timely that we're talking about this at the moment, because a lot of the land that Tim has just described, I'm fairly sure will be underwater at the moment. We've had an awful lot of rain at the start of 2026. So, farmers looking at that sort of land thinking, oh my goodness, here we go again. We're underwater. What's going to happen? What can I get from this land? Well, they now have another option, and that's got to be a good thing.
And Hugh, some fairly decent returns from this £100 million scheme, but they do include capital costs.
Yeah, until you actually sit down and look at the devil of the detail in terms of what they're actually doing. But I mean, overall, when you talk about the numbers quoted in the interview, yeah, it's fairly respectable, isn't it, in terms of what's there? And I think what it highlights is what we've said for a very, very long time now, for many years, that where you are going to deliver bang for your buck, i.e. the mega public goods for mega public money, you need to do it as a collective. And we know that when we're talking habitats, when we're talking creating those new wildlife corridors and biodiversity corridors, it's all about working together. Just rewilding your one big billionaire's 2,000 or 10,000 acres is nothing in terms of what you can deliver in terms of ecological potential than having 50 farmers all in a line down a 20-mile valley doing the same thing to the same themes. And it's huge what can be delivered there. And that's reflected in this deal. So I think it's a good thing. But the challenge going forward, though, is being, it's great doing it in the affluent Cotswolds where there's lots of like-minded neighbours all in a line. You come to somewhere where I live, and there's other parts of the country similar to where we are, where, yes, you've got landscapes, you've got valleys, you've got scarp slopes along the North Downs or whatever, but the people owning and managing those lands are hugely different in terms of what they want out of it. You've got simple farmers like me, you've got vineyard owners, you've got billionaire investors who have some warped view of the world, et cetera, et cetera. So it makes it more challenging.
Louise, you were saying earlier that the scale of these big projects can be daunting. £100 million, 3,000 hectares, working with more than 50 farmers. If we interrogate those numbers a little bit, and it's important to remember that this isn't free money, £100 million over 20 years, that's still £1,666 per hectare per year, a significant amount for, it has to be said, some significant work.
Yes, it is a significant amount, and it's also significantly better than that land will be earning them through food production at the moment. Of course, as Tim pointed out to us, there is a machine to run in terms of helping with the administration and setup of all these things. So not all of that money will be going straight back to the participating farmers, but they all have an agreement whereby they know what they're going to get. So Yeah, and again, as Tim has pointed out, DEFRA will have scrutinised the costs and returns very, very closely. So, they won't be hugely out of kilter with what a farmer might be able to get from one of the more ambitious environmental schemes. But yeah, it looks attractive. This is going to be really interesting to watch as this unfolds. I know that there's a lot more information to come about the private funders and, who's getting involved and what they're putting into the project. So we'll await that with interest, really. And I think Tim also pointed out that there were originally more than the 55 farms in this project when it was still fledgling. And some of them decided it wasn't for them. And I'm fairly sure that will be based on the finances. So, they may be able to do better through other things, whatever they may be. So, yeah, it's not going to be for everybody. But in this case, they've got a group of farmers working together really well, and they're going to deliver something which I think is going to be very exciting.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly Podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK itself, you can message us by texting the word farm followed by your message to 88440. Louise, some unusual but important news for winter bean growers this week. Severe early outbreaks of chocolate spot disease in some early drilled crops.
Very unusual news. We've got a very early outbreak of chocolate spot on winter beans. Quite a lot of crops affected. It's a worry. I mean, I've never known it come in this early, and nor have any of the agronomists who've noticed it seen it come in this early before. So, the reason is the weather, I think, and also the fact that some of these winter beans were drilled really quite early. So the disease has got in there. The wet leaf has meant that it's really been able to take hold. And of course, any sprays that need to be applied, and they need to be applied really ideally before you see the disease, it's not very easy to travel on this ground at the moment. So that's been alerted, and we have to hope that these crops can somehow get through this. But it's a very early outbreak of chocolate spot, and it's very unusual.
Yeah, not good, this mild, wet weather. It never seems to stop. It never rains, but it pours, although not in the case of the Red Tractor scheme, perhaps, Hugh. A little bit of good news from Red Tractor this week, making life easier for farmers.
Red Tractor about to unveil. I suppose they've been working to try and make their Red Tractor portal a bit more useful. Up until now, it's been a bit of just a thing that's there and doesn't really do much. But they're actually brought a whole load of effectively functionality to it, so you could do things like log. Put the app on your phone and then log things like it geolocates the picture. So when you've cleaned the grain store out or done something, I assume you could take, I don't know whether, I haven't asked the question because I'm going to get a demonstration in the next day or two, whether you could take a picture of a feed ticket with it. I don't know. But basically trying to bring that Red Tractor portal, something we've been saying for ages needs to happen, to embrace technology, to make the whole audit process easier, and just the general running within the if you're running your farm within assurance or the confines of assurance, just to make that easier day to day. So when it comes to audit time, everything's already in your pocket and done, and it makes the audit effortless because you're just doing it all the time. So it's a good move there, and we'll look forward to the grand unveiling. I think is going to be next week, and we'll be able to see what that functionality actually can deliver on the ground.
Yeah, we wait with bated breath to see what that's like and if it works. In the meantime, though, Hugh, this week's market prices, what are they delivering?
Thank you very much, Johann. Finished there. Deadweight has crept up this week, 636.4, up from 635.5. That's the first week in, long time, actually, since probably back into December, that it's actually, possibly even November, actually, that it's actually crept up. So it's moving up, and it's almost on a par. We're on some sort of parity now, actually. If you look at that deadweight steer figure, A year ago, it was 635.2. So we're slightly ahead of where we were a year ago, but obviously not on those heady highs we had of close to 7 earlier on last year. Live weight, 364.3. That's back 4p exactly on the week. Compare that to a year ago. Live weight was 350.2. Sheep rings spicing up. There's some festivals coming up. 7.13 on the dead weight for the SQQ. That's up 10p, just under 10p in a week. So some fire coming back in there. Those live weights, 350.4. That's taken added 6p, nearly just over 6p on the week. The pig price is not good. It's dropped another 0.8 of a penny, 188 dead this week. And the arable markets are similarly pretty damn depressing, with one or two exceptions. Feed wheat, 161.40 has gone up a massive 20p. There you go. That's going to save the boat, isn't it? 20p up on the week. 176.60 was last year's price this week last year. Milling wheat 171.50. Compare that to a year ago, you were getting 30 quid more than you're getting now, but that's dropped back £1 on the week. Feed barley 149.60. That's dropped back 2 quid on the week. Oilseed rape's the one bright spot on the arable markets this week, 428.1. 428.10. That's up just over or just under 8 quid on the week. Feed peas dropped back to 205.3. Feed beans 202.60. That's back about £1. Glimmer of hope on the energy market. Your diesel's back a penny, 66.11 for a litre of red tractor diesel, according to the Wednesday morning ring round.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, you may remember, with all this rain we're having, a fortnight ago we brought you news of an innovative drainage scheme improving soil health at the Allerton project in Leicestershire. Do have a listen if you're interested. It's a podcast from the 6th of February. This week we're bringing you a grower who is storing winter rainfall and using it to irrigate high-value crops during the drier summer months. Andrew Francis is Managing Director of Home Farm Nacton near Ipswich in Suffolk. Andrew has, as we say, 8 reservoirs, but he also has a special plea for the powers that be to take a more flexible approach when it comes to approving reservoir projects. Louise caught up with Andrew following the drought last summer.
As always, and seems to be, each year seems to get harder and harder. We're growing at least 15 to 16 irrigated crops. Some of that is double cropped. The challenge for us is the length of the irrigation season, or length of water demand with the crop diversity we're growing. This last year we started irrigating in the middle of March. The double whammy was that because it was so hot and dry, the minute you backed irrigation off, senescence came on really, really quickly. So it's not like crops just slowly continued for the rest of the season. They pretty much just ended there and then.
And I think you said there are 8 reservoirs in total on the farm here. And today we have looked at a reservoir that you are expanding. So you're adding to your storage capacity. What sort of cost is that? And were you able to get some grant funding to help with that?
We applied for a grant. It was a very lengthy process. We went through phase 1, no problem at all. Got to phase 2, and even though what we were trying to achieve ticked absolutely every box within the grant application, it was recognised that we were doing absolutely the right thing for an environmental perspective, from a business resilience, water resilience perspective. Unfortunately, we were unable to have the grant approved because we had fallen down in part of the process between phase 1 and phase 2. And the issues really is around actually regulation and how some of the judgments are made on what we do are set up to be very, very black and white questions and answers. And when you look at innovative approaches, complex systems, you cannot put a tick in a yes or no box. So you have to go on to the explanation stage. And we fell foul of something not quite aligning on a box ticked. So the whole principle was right. It was just the box was ticked wrongly.
That's incredibly frustrating, not just for you, but for farmers in this area who rely and need irrigation. How do the authorities need to change their approach? What can they do to make it better, that process?
I think they need to understand that actually, as we move forward, a lot of the simple solutions have gone. So complexity is increasing. Resilience is all about small percentages across multiple, and through multiple mechanisms, not one solution. So therefore, your solutions become very integrated, and it's about trying to get that complexity across is really difficult on a yes/no answer sheet. So I think there's a real big piece around changing how they're asking questions, the evidence they're looking for. Maybe they should be coming out on farm and seeing us. Let's put the boots on the ground. Don't worry about whether we've ticked yes or no. Come and see us and we'll explain it. And then, as we've seen from today, it's people just get it.
That's Andrew Francis from Home Farm Nacton. Louise, an interview we recorded with Andrew last September. Again, good to listen to it now because, it's been so wet, and this is one way of harvesting and storing winter water so you can use it for irrigation during these dry summers we're seeing many more of, rather than just letting it flow into the rivers and out to sea.
Yes, and of course that was one of the difficulties that was told to us, wasn't it, when we were up there, that that they need to be able to store this winter water. They need to be able to have it ready for when they need to use irrigation when it's hotter and drier than it is at the moment. So that was a frustration, wasn't it? Not being allowed to fill the reservoirs at a time when they thought that they should be able to. The other thing, of course, which was a big discussion point at the time was that we know, don't we, that these abstraction licensing rules are changing. So I think they're changed, don't they, this April? And they were looking at, I think the figure that they gave was 30% less water was going to be available for food production. Obviously, huge demands on water, whether that's from the population, from the environment, whatever. And of course, because food isn't seen as a public good, they were quite far down the pecking order when it was coming to these licenses. So, that there is going to be a different scene this year, or this coming year. And of course, on top of all that, we had that very hot and dry weather last summer. So, talking to the farmers there, they'd had to really make some quite difficult decisions on water use, on these high value crops, and whether they were going to compromise yield or compromise quality. And I think actually Andrew Francis up at Nacton there, he had to take the decision to compromise yield rather than quality, because he knew what the supermarkets would think of that. So, yeah, and I think, the issue started to develop from June onwards, and they were put in quite a difficult situation. And, when we think about what we're expecting from climate change and the warmer, wetter winters, hotter, drier summers, that was just a glimpse really of what the future might hold. So, yeah, they need a number of things to happen. They need to be able to get planning permission for building more reservoirs. They need to be able to fill them in the winter. And generally the awareness of the amount of water that they need for food production in that part of the world, really, really important.
It's a challenge, though, isn't it, Hugh, to ensure that agriculture gets what many growers and livestock producers would consider its fair share of water, competing against residential homes, against business properties, against commercial interests, and food production often seems to pay second fiddle to the environment too. Getting grants and planning permission is always a real challenge.
Yeah, it is. Look, let's contextualise this. We're talking about, Louise is talking there about the lucky 5% that actually have irrigation on their farmland. Remember, over 95% of the UK's farmland does not have irrigation. Yes, you could rebound slightly on that and say, but that 5% that does is far, far more productive than some of that 95%. And that's true. And what these guys are doing in terms of their high value vegetable output and stuff like that is really key, important stuff that we need to be doing more of here. So that puts it into context. We need to get so much better, as we keep saying, blessed by all this rain we've been having over the last few weeks, few months. We've had we're up to 30, fun fact of the week, 37% of our 728 mils has fallen here on our farm in Surrey since the 1st of January. But we haven't captured any of that because we don't have a reservoir. I think the bright spots on the horizon are, and I was looking through some of the MPPF consultation on planning, so National Planning Policy Framework. Steve Reed's department now, former DEFRA secretary, is pushing through these planning changes. And there's a load of stuff in there around farming development, which I think actually is really encouraging. It's really good. It's in favour of presumption for anything agricultural, including reservoirs. This whole bun fight over abstraction licenses, obviously around existing networks of reservoirs in really dry spots like East Anglia. Well, if I'm here in Surrey and I haven't got a reservoir, it's a dry spot as well. We're only 720 mil of rain here, or 728 here. But if I haven't got a reservoir and I'm not abstracting or capturing it as it comes off the hill at the moment, and I start, if that's just going to run straight down the brook and into the Mole and into the Thames and off into the North Sea, what difference does it make if I put X million gallons in a reservoir? So it would be interesting if we could get more reservoirs built, if the planning was more favourable and easier, which it should be under these new MPPF rules. Is there still going to be the bun fight, particularly in the wetter areas of the country, over abstraction, because those effectively rainfall pinches that happen in the summer months, as we saw last year, even in wet parts of the UK, really starting to have a huge impact on potential output and productivity. And going forward, as you say, if it gets worse, we've really got to get our ducks in the row. And this isn't just going to be a story about big, productive, lovely farms in East Anglia. This is going to be a story about every farm pretty much across the country.
Yeah, certainly not something that's confined to farms in East Anglia. One thing that is unusual about Nacton Home Farm, though, is that it's part of this Felixstowe hydrocycle scheme. Louise, just explain what that innovative hydrocycle scheme is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to put it very simply, that's a water recycling facility, isn't it? So water that was just being pumped out to sea, they are bringing back on and sorting out so that they can use it on their farms. And it was, I can't quite remember, I'm sorry, was it 8 or so landowners who got together and saw that project through? And he did say, didn't he, thank goodness that somebody had the foresight to get that up and running and get involved with that, because that is where some of the water that they need comes from. So a fantastic facility. And there was some discussion, wasn't there, on that day about whether more of those could be built up the coast and they could make better use of this water. And as Hugh just said, pumping it out to sea when actually you could use it on the land first. So, this is all part of what the East Suffolk Water Abstractors Group does. They get together, they discuss the issues that they have. They're very aware about the importance of water to their businesses and to food production and to that region. So it was a really interesting day, and hopefully their reservoirs are filling up nicely as we speak, and they won't be in the same situation this coming summer as they were last summer.
Yeah, good luck to everyone battling sodden and waterlogged fields and too much water in the wrong place at the wrong time. Let's hope that some of it will be available in the coming months as the summer draws near. That's about it for this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. We do hope you've found what you've heard interesting and useful. If you have, please do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you've really enjoyed what you've heard, please do, as ever, leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with all the latest news, views and analysis of all the big stories affecting UK agriculture. But for now, until next week, I'm Johann Tasker.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Thank you for listening. This episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast was brought to you in partnership with Tesco.